Hello, please subscribe and like for our channel. Thanks very much.
Hello, welcome to this new tutorial presented by the SchrDbb, namely DASSI BOPDA. In this tutorial, we're going to see one very important aspect of medicine that is being neglected, that is surgical knotting. Now, we need to know that there are different surgical knotting techniques. Surgical knotting can either be divided by surgical knotting technique with the hands or surgical knotting technique with the needle holder. Now, we need to know that I'm going to first start with the introduction of surgical knotting. Now, you need to know that generally, when you want to start with the introduction of surgical knotting, we have what is called the pivot and we have what is called the moving hand. So, depending on if you are a lefter or a righter, or if you are more comfortable with one hand or the other, you can either use one of the hand as a pivot and the other as a moving hand. Basically, so I'm just going to do a normal popular knotting technique that usually people do. So let's say that I do this knotting. Basically, this is a normal knotting technique that people usually do. Basically. So when I do this normal knotting technique, the moving hand is this hand, so the pivot hand stays this. Is it clear? So what I do is that I'll now push just with the pivot hand. The pivot hand is the one that stays stable and the moving hand is the one that moves downward here. Is it clear? So that's the first preliminary element on surgical knotting that you have to note. Is it clear? The moving hand and the pivot hand. The moving hand is the one that does the action and it pulls the thread down, and the pivot hand is a hand that is always stable on which the moving hand is moving. Is it clear? But now let's bring another point. If I open up this, you realize that the thread opens up back. Is it clear? So it means that it was not closed very well. Is it clear? So what you have to note is that the human body is made up of tense tissues, particularly at the level of the fascias. Is it clear? That's why you have to note what is called the first knot and then the second knot. Is it clear? Generally, you have to do the first knot, a double first knot, for it to be much more tense and resist the tension action of the fascias. Is it clear? So when you're at the level of the fascia, you have to do two knots. Is it clear? So this is the moving hand, this is the pivot hand. So I'm just going to move slide downward through it. Is it clear? It's usually good to do two knots before knotting or locking the knot. Is it clear? So let's do it. So I just move, I close. Is it clear? And then I knot the second time. Is it clear? That's that first knot. So when I go down, you realize that if I lock here, it is going to be, if I pull back, it's going to be much more lock compared to the first one. Is it clear? So that is what is called the first knotting technique. Is it clear? The first knot. Is it clear? So the first knot is very important as a preliminary element. When you are doing the first knot, you should always do two knots on the first knot, particularly at the level of the fascias, or else the suture is not going to be the knot is not going to be very stable. Is it clear? So that's the first point that you have to put in mind. Now let's start back. I'll do again that simple knotting technique. I'll do it again. Is it clear? And then you close the knot. When you close the knot, you have to note that the second knot, the principle of the second knot is that the second knot should go in the opposite direction to the first. So I'll go now in the opposite direction to the first in order to lock the first knot. Is it clear? That is the principle of the second knot. The principle of the second knot is that the second knot goes in the opposite direction to the first in order to lock the first knot. And now the third knot comes back in the opposite direction to the second. It comes in the opposite direction to the second in order to lock the second. Is it clear? So that is how you have to do your knotting styles. Your knotting style has to vary between the first knot. The principle of the first knot is that your first knot should contain two knots. Is it clear? In order to lock and prevent opposition of the tension action of the fascias and other tissue that have high tensile strength. Is it clear? Now the second knot should go in the opposite direction to the first knot. Is it clear? In order to lock the first knot, and the third knot should go in opposite direction to the second knot in order to lock the second knot. Is it clear? That is the principle of knotting. The next principle of knotting is that your pivot hand is always the hand that is at the side of the needle. This is just an artifact. Is it clear? It's not a clear suturing. It's not a clear suturing field. Is it clear? So normally you should have a thread, and then the pivot hand should be always the hand that has the needle, and the moving hand is the hand that does not contain the needle. Is it clear? So this pivot hand is one that does not contain needle, and this is the moving hand which contain the pivot hand is the one that contain needle, and the moving hand does not contain the needle. Is it clear? So that is the principle and the introduction of knotting. Is it clear? Now afterward, I will tell you about the two major types of knotting. Is it clear? The two major types of knotting are knotting with the hands and knotting with the needle holder. Is it clear? You have either knotting with the hands and knotting with the needle holder. Now, knotting with the hands, there are two major techniques when knotting with the hands. We have the one-handed knotting technique and we have the two-handed knotting technique. While knotting with the needle holder, there's only a single technique to knot with the needle holder that I use. Is it clear? So now we're going to move on to the different knotting technique. Thank you.